got it. Okay. I made it out. I'm sorry, Mom.
We made it. We made it.
Okay.
All right. Wow. Okay. Very exciting. Very, very exciting to talk about this legendary. I feel like to say book is an understatement. This was like truly a hero's journey, and it felt like the catalyst for my own journey in a lot of ways, which we'll get into. But I want to start with having you set the scene a little bit for us. Sure. In terms of context, background, all that jazz.
Sure. So, where do I even begin? So first and foremost, before I even start, I want to introduce everybody to my very best friend, Nicole Lawrence. From what I know about Nicole and what I want to share with everybody about Nicole, she is a native of the Northeast. Northeast runs deep in her blood, in her veins. She is studying to be a therapist at the moment. She's almost done and about to move into her internship. I met Nicole when I was working for a midwifery school, and we forged our friendship during the pandemic, going through our own life trials and journeys of healing. We both were really deep into our mental health journeys and both got diagnosed, and were able to thrive from getting diagnosis and getting the proper support for things that we have been struggling with our whole life. I remember during that time that Nicole met me actually right as I found out that I was pregnant with my second child. And through the trajectory of our friendship, I started to just start writing. It just kind of started pouring out of me. I wasn't actually planning to write a book, even though I knew deep down that I needed to get what was coming out written. And based on the conversations that I had with Nicole about her past, she resonated deeply with the themes that I was writing. So I shared a lot of what I was writing with her. She then shared with me more about her life, but then further, she shared that she had wanted to go to school, back to school, to be a therapist. And I was very supportive of that because just alone in the conversations I had with her, I gained a lot of support in addition to my other support system, members of my support system and my own therapist. So I ended up writing a recommendation letter for that school that you got into, and we're also happy and super proud. I think you're about almost or more than halfway through your program. You'll be done next year. You are the youngest of all your brothers and sisters. What else can I say about Nicole? You are quirky, you are fun, you are passionate, you are a fighter for the people that you believe in, and you fight for what you love. You're hilarious. You're one of the best Geminis that I've ever met in my life. And the specific reason why I've asked Nicole to talk to me and interview me about this book is because of her intimate relationship with the book as one of my editors. And also because I know that she was going to be able to lend her expertise, her growing expertise in mental health, health and healing, and then her own personal lens, not just on her life, but what she understands about trauma, survival, themes around patriarchy and feminism and femininity and sexuality. So that is Nicole. I don't know if I missed anything that you want me to add, but that is Nicole Lawrence.
That was one of the best introductions I've ever had. So you nailed it. And okay, Carmen Mojica. Wow, I could go on. I will try to keep it succinct so we can get into the meat of what we're here to discuss today. But Carmen Mojica, a legend, an icon. As Carmen mentioned, we met when we were both working at a midwifery school. Carmen is a wonderful midwife herself and a midwife educator, a dedicated individual to social justice advocacy, dedicated to improving the world and improving and fighting for the rights and the care for women, birthing people, and especially supporting historically, systemically marginalized individuals and midwife students to return back to their communities. Which that's a whole discussion Carmen and I love to get into. But to keep it around the book, I remember when I was working with Carmen and we were at this large company meeting and there was share a fun fact with yourself. And I kind of cringed at the thought of trying to think of a fact for myself. And Carmen had gone before me and Carmen shared, I'm a published writer. And I said, wait, I didn't know that this person could be even more cool. I got my undergrad in creative writing, and so that was something that I didn't realize that Carmen and I had in common until she shared that fact that she had been a self-published writer. And so I instantly Googled her name. I was not paying attention in the meeting after that. I Googled her name, purchased the book, got the book, started reading it, and I was like, well, damn, okay. And so from there, as Carmen shared the trajectory, and I won't repeat it, but from there we started sharing more about other aspects outside of our jobs that we shared with one another. And we saw that there was such a through line and connection of being dedicated storytellers and not just victims, survivors of our own personal experiences. And from there, as Carmen said, she started sharing more and more of what she was writing and what was coming to her. And it was honestly my favorite part of working with her was getting to hear and have those hour-long chats with her about what was going on creatively for her. And then I was so honored when Carmen asked me to edit this book. It really is the Undrowning, and we'll get to that part of it. But yeah, Carmen Mojica, what can I say? Fantastic, intelligent, social justice warrior, like truly what I think of when I think of social justice warrior, has done so much for her community. Yeah, I could go on and on. I'm going to pause so we can get to what we're here to talk about. So yeah, thank you for reminding me that introductions are necessary. But yeah, I would love to hear from you as the author, some context behind, behind all this.
So, thank you for the introduction. So the name of the book is Desahogo, the Undrowning. So in Spanish, the word desahogar means to vent. But if you translate and you break it down, if you literally break it down, it means undrown. And I actually, I wanted to call the book something else, but this is what came to me because a lot of the imagery that I use in the book has to do with water. And when I think about the trauma that I was processing and the grief I was processing, it felt like drowning. And throughout a lot of my writing throughout my life, water has been an ongoing theme and like imagery that I've used. I'm a Cancer, so like it makes sense. I'm a water individual. But the quote that I use in the book is from a college friend, Nia Thomas, and I'm gonna actually read it because it's like,
please.
It was something that I was meditating the entire time that I was reading it. So it says, "Desahogar is one of my favorite words in Spanish. It translates to vent, but if you break it down, the literal translation, it means to undrown, as if letting go of the burdens and secrets you are holding onto will be the thing to save you from drowning." What a beautiful image. And she's also a writer, also like loves to read. And so I used that quote, and it was just like, this is what I'm doing. Like writing this book, I'm letting go. I'm venting. I'm letting go of all this water that I felt like I was drowning from, holding on to like over a decade's worth of very specific trauma, which we'll get to later. But just like slow, and then and like when we think about dying, many people think about like sudden death instead of like this gradual like death that I was experiencing, where I was just like drowning, drowning, and drowning, and drowning, and drowning, which is interesting because I gave birth in water to my second daughter, and you know, Nicole, I don't like water birth. I always talk about like I don't like water birth more so because of like the texture situation versus like the actual like whatever. Like you want to give birth in water, do you know go crazy?
Sure.
But I gave birth in water, and it's beautiful that this ended up being the name of the book, Desahogo, this imagery with water and undrowning myself, and it was the birth of my second daughter that ended up freeing me, right? That I ended up giving birth in water, and so I started to write, and it started to pour out of me immediately after I gave birth. I started to write, and the imagery picked itself. So I was not planning to use the Greek mythology that we'll get more deeper into. I was not planning to use that. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to use Hades and Persephone or the Greek pantheon as the theme of this book. The poetry just came out like that. It just started to talk. It, like the poetry, like the writer's voice. Like I was actually meditating on something the other day. Like there's like a voice in that writers have that speaks to them. I know that sounds hella crazy to anybody who's not a writer.
Nope,
but
I totally get it.
So that the muse, if you will, started speaking about like the river Styx, about Hades, Persephone, and that was just kept coming up and coming up and coming up. So I just went with it. And Greek mythology was something that I was hyper fixated on as a child, as a middle schooler, and as a high schooler. I always liked Greek mythology. So as it continued to pour out of me, I just went with it. I expanded since I had such a like good foundational base on Greek mythology. I ended up doing research just to make sure that I knew that was correct about the finer points that I already remembered about certain Greek mythological figures.
Sure.
And so I started writing this book in 2022, and I completed it in 2024. So it took me 2 years, but there was a good amount of writing and poetry that actually had been written years before, right? So there was poetry in there that I added that was years before. A lot of the prose is what was the newer stuff that I was writing. So a lot of the writing in the book, a lot of the poetry, I wrote in like 2007, 2010. So it was poetry that I actually was scared to share, because of who it was about, which is the Hades figure in the book, if you will. Being afraid to share that and be vulnerable because of this fear that I had of not just him, but of like what happened to me, and talking about it out loud and publicly, being afraid of retribution and retaliation, all the things that people who have survived sexual assault, to say it very plainly, are afraid of when they talk about their abuser. The photo shoot. So I want to talk about the photo shoot because I am serving. Like, can we just
yes,
I am serving all of the looks. So, for those of y'all listening who are parents or moms, after you give birth, it takes some time for you to feel good in your new body, and so it was a combination of like doing something for myself to like boost my self-esteem. I had actually wanted to do a series of photos that were connected to the book, and maybe in some future I'll do that. And I say maybe because it costs pretty penny to do this. Like, this was not just amateur. Like, nah, I got a photographer. I got a makeup artist. I had somebody do my hair. Like, I bought.
Nothing.
I styled.
Nothing about that was amateur.
No, I did put the outfit together, the green dress, and so, outside of it being like a self-esteem booster, it also, like, the color green was very intentional. So when I was growing up, I had issues with self-esteem, being a Black Dominican woman growing up in New York, growing up in a culture that was anti-Black, And so there was one memory I have of being, I think, middle school or somewhere around like middle school age, nine to like
Mm.
there's 9 to like 12 years old, and I was in the production of The Wiz, and they told me that I was gonna be The Wiz. Now I had no idea what The Wiz even was. I hadn't even watched The Wiz at this time of my life.
Okay.
I knew what The Wizard of Oz was, but I had never seen The Wiz. I was, as Dominican, and maybe people who are first generation probably relate to this, like, I was largely disconnected from the American culture. So there was, like, cultural references that people would make that I'm, like, right over my head like a hoodie. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So The Wiz, I was just like, all right, well, like, I'm familiar enough with The Wizard of Oz, so whatever. But they told me I was going to be The Wiz. And so my outfit as The Wiz was this, like, age-appropriate, strapless, emerald green dress with a green shawl. And my hair was done, and I had, like, low heel, low pumps, little black pumps, and I felt beautiful. It's like one of the few memories I have of growing up that I felt beautiful. And so that image came to me because when I experienced the trauma this book is centered on, it happened right before the summer, in the spring. And so for a long time before I was able to finally do a major amount of healing around that wound, springtime was really hard for me. So the reason why I picked the green and like the yellow stool and that I'm sitting on and the pink was to like invoke like reclaiming of spring and being in the spring.
Yes.
Green also happens to be the color of the heart chakra. And so in healing and giving myself this gift of self-love, of dressing up and feeling beautiful and having people take care of me and beautifying me, it was also like, heart-centered all the way through. So it's one of my favorite series of pictures that I have of myself. I love my cover. I love the pictures.
That's very meta to the point of this book, right? Is we'll see at the end, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but we see at the end that reclaiming. And even halfway through the book, when we see even your shift from third person to first person, we see that shift of you, even as you're describing dissociation, which is such a common phenomenon, post-traumatic stress, adjustment disorder, if we're going to start bringing in some psychological phenomenons around trauma, especially sexual assault trauma, which is such a violation of the somatic experience, right? Which is, in terms of the psyche, how we ground ourselves into the human experience without being in our bodies, right? We're just drifting. We're just afloat. And so with such a violation, such as a somatic sexual violation, we see eventually even the discussion of the first person, and you're still describing imagery of being dissociated, of like seeing the world through, like a rubbery gaze, that imagery of the water. Again, you're talking about seeing things through like watery eyes. We still even see that as a small piece and layers throughout the second half of the book, where you're reclaiming your physical body. And with that claiming of the physical body, then you're claiming other important elements like your right to pleasure. And we talk a lot about this in our personal conversations of the gross correlation between pleasure and sexuality and sex, where, to your point, this photo shoot was pleasure for you. It had nothing to do with sex. It had nothing to do with male appeasement, performing for a man, nothing. In fact, it was more pleasurable because it wasn't for that reason. And so I'm so glad that you shared as much as you did about the photo shoot, because I think it is, understanding the backstory behind it is a really beautiful depiction visually and oracally about what this book really is about. I guess with that, let's unless you have any thoughts.
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. So we've got the background story, and I guess for my mind's sake, starting more towards the beginning, I'm fine to jump around, but the way I organize things, I think that would help. All that glitters. Y'all, you do not need to go to school for writing or for literature to know that this is a banger opener. I mean, the first line, vanity was his favorite sin, in women to be precise, like, just... Okay, let me get to the larger point, because I'm about to go line by line and geek out, but let me not. This first piece for me, what it really depicts is, most importantly, I think it really shows, of course, you're setting the scene, like, storytelling wise, which you do so beautifully. But to the larger conversation here, I think something that it really sets the tone of is it sets the tone for how patriarchy pits women against women. We definitely do see male gaze, but to your point, as females operating in this society, that's not really a new narrative for us. That's not anything new. Once you come to a certain coming of age, unfortunately that happens earlier for some of us than not. It's not groundbreaking to be like, oh, a man is checking out a room full of women and looking at an inappropriately aged, relationship with this younger girl. But what really took my breath away through all of this was the way that you were so able to succinctly depict women tearing other women down as a result, an unfortunate side effect, if you will, of patriarchy. And so I guess that's a good place for us to start, is talking a little bit about this depiction of women hating younger women and other women. And throughout this book, there's so much emphasis on it. And I'd love to hear a little bit more from you as to the importance and the weight that you gave it in your book, alongside with something like experiencing sexual assault at the hands of a man. Let's explore that a little bit more.
Sure. So I loved writing that piece because, like you said, it really set the tone for this is how it began, right? I'm not gonna start with the painful part. I'm gonna start with what was surrounding this character Persephone, which was who I was, right? Let me zoom out and let me show you what's going on. So first, on a Greek mythology level, so the Greek goddesses are complex, right? In this particular story, I choose to focus on Hera, the queen of the gods, Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, who was also Persephone's mother, and I talk about Persephone. Then the two gods I speak about are Hades, god of the underworld, and Zeus. And so I wanted to talk about I actually focused on the more unsavory part of Hera's character. Sometimes when I think about the book, I'm like, maybe I wasn't fair to Hera, I didn't, but I do feel like in this piece, I do offer her some grace, because I talk about why she was such a bitch. I guess, if you want to just say it, because we do see her come up later on in the book again, why she was such a bitch, why she was so jealous. She was jealous of Demeter, not because of anything that Demeter specifically did, but one, the environment that she had lived in, two, because Demeter had a child with Zeus, and Zeus was a womanizer, which we could talk about later at the other piece, right? Zeus was a womanizer, and she suffered. She could not get retribution or justice by going after Zeus. He's the fucking king of the gods, And so her anger, if you and this is not just me depicting her in this way, but in Greek mythology, when you look at the stories of Hera, she focused a lot of her jealousy and rage towards the women that Zeus was engaged with. So I talk about to relate that to my personal life during that time in my 20s, not just in specific to the abuser that I speak about in my book. A lot of what I experienced, even like some of like pop culture, and what is encouraged in pop culture is women going after other women. Like if a man cheats on a woman, she directs her anger towards the woman, or she goes after the woman and tries to go after her.
Yes.
Women going after other women's men because that's what they want, and many of us are guilty of doing that and falling into that. Like,
absolutely,
I am not.
Sure.
I am not innocent. Like my early 20s, late teens. And then in specific to this abuser, there were women around me who we were, on our own healing journeys, and we were at odds with each other, like over men, like wanting this man, wanting that man. But a lot of it was because of how male censored we are trained and programmed to be as women. Like we are trained and encouraged to center our lives around men, and to side with men, right? Even if they are the cause of the discord between women, right? And so in this particular piece, All That Glitters, we see Hera's direct anger towards Demeter. We also see in that piece, because I reread it really quickly. We also see some anti-blackness, because in there she talks about how she wanted to purposely make Persephone ugly, as venting her rage by asking Helios, which is the sun, to scorch her. But all that ended up happening is that Persephone was just darker skinned. She was still beautiful, and she hated that. There's I write Hera to be very severe, right? And that severity that I write for her is also like echoes some severe older figures, family and otherwise, that were probably not that. And that's actually why I chose to write the book in this style instead of like autobiographical or memoir wise, because I was incorporating a lot of like archetypes and themes of people that I have come across, and older women and women in the Hera, the hateful, scorned woman, right? Then Demeter as like, and I'm sure we'll talk more deeply about this, Demeter as my mom, because I've never been able or felt comfortable writing directly about my mom, but as my mother, but not just my mom, but mothers in general. Mothers that are in this position that Demeter is in, where like they are ridiculed by their family, they are not taken seriously, they have been harmed deeply, and because of the harm that they experienced, that's why they're showing up the way they are as mothers. Hera even says like, this woman is crazy, she's ugly, she's unkempt, like why was she able to get Zeus's attention? And then this is all being said from Hades' point of view too, so that's something important for this piece. Like, I could have offered Hera more grace, and I could have made her, humanized her and been more sympathetic, which I am, to like the other depictions that of her in Greek mythology and everybody who's written about it. But this is written from Hades' point of view. So this is what Hades is seeing. And he is speaking about Hera and Demeter and Persephone from his point of view, right? So he is not offering grace. He is just seeing it from like, this is what it is, and this is what I'm seeing. And then I'm zeroing in on Persephone. And it's not just like I'm going to hit on Persephone. I'm going to methodically get her to come to me, so that by the end of it, she thinks that it was her fault, instead of that I'm going after her because she catches my attention and this is what I want. Which in therapy, right after I gave birth to my daughter and I was talking about the specific abuser that Hades represents, when I was finally talking about like the trauma, like I had gone to therapy beforehand, but I had never been able to get as deep as I did in 2022, because when I gave birth to my daughter, I came back into my body and I was able to feel and face it, and getting diagnosed, and I'll talk about my diagnosis in a little bit, really allowed me to talk about it. So when I talked to my therapist about it, she was the first person that said, he groomed you. That was grooming. And actually, for everybody who's listening, let's talk about what is grooming. Like, what does it mean when somebody is being groomed? So when someone's being groomed, there's usually a power dynamic. Usually the groomer and the groomee, there's either like an age differential, there's like somebody is a celebrity and the other person is not, someone's a teacher, the other person's a student, someone has power and somebody doesn't. And when somebody is grooming someone else, there's intentionality. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. The groomer is intentionally getting the person where they want them, whether they're grooming them for nefarious purposes or they're grooming them for sexual purposes. A lot of the conversation around grooming has to do with later on sexual assault. I actually put two and two together when my therapist said this to me, and when I was studying how to prepare to protect my children from people, and get education and conversations I did not get as a child, which is another part of why was Persephone so susceptible to being groomed? No one gave her this is what you should watch for, right? And so groomers are often look for people that are susceptible, vulnerable. They study their subject. They make sure that they know how to groom them. It's usually a slow process. It's not, they don't go from 0 to 100. Sometimes they'll take weeks, months, until they get what they want. In this particular case, sexual gratification. So that is what grooming is. And so that piece, all that glitters, is also setting the stage so that you understand when the seed was planted for Haiti. And maybe it wasn't specifically this tea party, but you're seeing his point of view of this is not an accident. I'm noticing this girl, she's neglected, she's off to the corner, she's perfect. I mean, there's also prophecy that I'm going to be overthrown by one of Zeus's children, but as a man, this is perfect. She's by herself, she doesn't think she's pretty, nobody remembered her birthday. How do I slowly sneak myself in so when so I can get her where I want her? So that's that piece. Yep. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add from your perspective, but that's what I can say about all that glitters.
I mean, I think you hit everything on it that, I was hoping to discuss in this. I think the biggest thing I'll say taking away from it, because I want to follow the grooming thread, which sounds weird to say, but I'm going to go with it. I'm glad you pointed out that this is from Haiti's perspective, and something that I think you were conveying that I just feel the need to re-articulate is that Hades would not give any sort of grace or leniency about any of the behavior he's seeing, not simply because of a matter-of-fact approach, right, which is often the falsified, genderized tropes that we're told about men. Oh, well, men just say it how it is and women are over-emotional. He's not giving any grace because, to be quite frank, he doesn't give a shit about any of these women.
Nope.
In many ways, he loathes these women. I mean, Hera's his sister. I mean, all of these people, for him, I would even say right, when I think about the patriarchy and the inherent hatred towards women, I think about where that hatred stems from on a psychological level. And the thing that I can come up with is, yes, indoctrination. Though also I think because ultimately it represents the very thing, there's a sort of resilience and liberation that I feel as a woman, and as I've observed other women, and as I've talked to other women, and I don't claim to be right, but I think there's a sort of resilience and liberation that women represent and can carry even amongst deliberate systematic discrimination, deliberate violations, mental, emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual even. And I think that for men fostered in a patriarchy, and who really willingly drink that Kool-Aid, if you will, I think that resentment turns from something that is trained to something that is, oh no, you are the enemy because you represent the very thing that I'm told that I have to destroy within myself.
Exactly.
And so that's, for me, a lot of those elements come up later in the book, which is how I ultimately arrived there in the beginning of this piece, because Hades doesn't just not give Hera the benefit of the doubt because he's just claiming it to be how it is. He hates her, and he hates, in a way, he also, even though Persephone is perfect, he also hates Persephone. He wants to destroy her, right? The conquest. So that was the only other part of it that I wanted to pull at to connect it to other pieces. But in terms of grooming, yeah, I guess let's talk about the ways in which we see elements of grooming throughout this book, since we brought it up.
Oh man. No,
I know, we're just diving right in.
No, I'm just thinking because I'm flipping through the book as I'm talking to you, and then I came across the piece Adonis and Persephone. He is a boy. And he was groomed by Aphrodite. And so it would have been easy for me just to talk about men are trash and I hate men throughout the entire book, but I specifically picked Adonis because of what his relationship was with Aphrodite, because I wanted to also highlight something we were talking about, there's something that I have to, femininity is something that men are encouraged to kill within themselves, and men are also hurt by women. When we think of abusers, we often think, oh, men are, raping women. But yes, men are also sexually assaulting little boys, but women are also sexually assaulting children, right? And in this particular piece, right, he was groomed. He also, Adonis also in some systematic way for a child, right, because he was young when this happened, also was the first person to hurt Persephone in that way, right? So she was, so when we're talking about grooming, right, since this happened to Persephone at a young age, she was already in a state of trauma, in a state of disassociation, because she felt cast aside and like she did something wrong, right? So that the beginning of her grooming was before Hades, right? Because she was hurt by somebody that was hurt by one of the goddesses. Aphrodite is an interesting character in the book, because I don't paint her as like this goddess of love, and I don't romanticize her. I also use some of her villain side, while also like she was hurt as well, right? And then in grooming, I also talk about Medusa. I talk about Medusa, though, was not groomed in this book. Medusa was directly harmed. So she was a direct victim of rape, of being assaulted, period, under discussion. But since Medusa was Persephone's best friend, her not having Medusa to speak to, having her friend destroyed and her reputation destroyed, right? She never got Medusa's side until much later of what happened, right? And then so I use poetry and I use some prose to talk about like Persephone's growing up process. So we have all that glitters, then I talk about Adonis and what happens to Adonis and Persephone. Then I go to coming of age. So then she comes of age, and it was her birthday, and she had felt ignored. She was 17 at the time. She had grown up 17 years being in the shadows, unnoticed, was also showing signs of some like mental health disturbances in this particular piece, from like the trauma with Adonis, the relationship she has with Demeter, her mother, and her
Mm-hmm.
creating her own little world, which for people who survive trauma, at least I can speak for myself, we we build our own world to protect ourselves. The younger you are, the deeper that is. But so I depict here in coming of age, at 17 years old, she's talking about like I was in the library. I was reading, I was in my own little head. I'd make up things in my head. I would talk to myself. Other people,
Mm-hmm.
like the Graces I mentioned, would see me talking to myself, think I'm crazy, and that everybody would say that I'd be crazy like my mother. Um, I don't know that I want to talk about mother wound and mother daughter relationship just yet right now, but that is the
No, yeah.
but that's another nod to like me talking about this later on in the book.
Right.
And then I talk about her becoming a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Then I talk about the tarot. So from my own personal story, that is actually a part of my story where I was outright introduced to tarot by my abuser. And so in the
Mm.
book, I write about Persephone being gifted a tarot deck that first all that glitters. Then in this
Yeah.
particular piece, coming of age, she's on the grass. She's spreading the cat tarot deck, right, that he had given her, and I talk about like how every birthday she would take out the tarot card deck and hug it. Thinking of Hades because she hadn't seen him since she got this deck. And then
Right.
I go on to talk about how like she has this tarot card deck spread out. He comes up behind her and is talking to her about the cards. He's like, like caressing her cheek, being uncle-ish, right? But definitely something
Mm.
far more sinister, right? Out behind his
Right.
affection for her. And then he's talking to her about the cards, teaches her about the cards, and she's mystified because somebody again is giving her attention and talking to her about the cards. Then
Right.
he pulls out two cards, the High Priestess, and he says, "This is who you are," which is for a foreshadowing of who she actually becomes to be, right?
Right.
And he says, like, it's the High Priestess, intuitive and passive and whatnot. And then in that piece is like I say, this is one of the very few times that he was sincere with her. Like he was actually speaking truth and being very sincere about who she is.
Right.
Because he recognized like this is some like yes, she might be all of these things like bordering on crazy and it's by herself and isolated, but this young girl is powerful. Um and this is actually, from my own story. Like this is what my abuser did to me actually with
Mm.
the high priestess card. He's like, this is who you are. So that is direct from my story, my own personal story.
Okay.
And then his card that he pulled out for him is the devil. So sidebar or side quest as we like to call it. So I talk about Greek mythology in this book, but I also speak and have a lot of Catholic religious undertones because I was raised Catholic and
Yes.
Catholicism had a huge impact on my mental health and the way that my sexuality as well. So I talk and I have poetry and writing that inject a little bit of Catholicism and Christianity, even the fact that all that glitters at the first line is sin, right? And there really isn't any concept of sin in Greek mythology. But so I talk about the devil, right? That's the card he pulls for himself.
Right.
And he was like, I'm the god of the underworld. So yeah, of course this makes sense. Um and then after he gives her a lesson about the tarot card reading, he asks her to come with him. Come with me. It's your birthday. Let me take you out. Let's celebrate you for your birthday. Now, something that I do in the first piece and in this piece is that I talk about Persephone noticing how she felt. So I describe the discomfort she felt. I describe how hesitant and scared she actually was, but how she was fighting. She fought her intuition. And this is something that was happened to me in my life, and not just my life, but other people that I know. The butterflies, the hesitation, the anxiety that we felt around certain people in our life. We weren't taught to read that as a danger sign, as a red flag that we felt this way. So even here it says she could feel her insides fluttering with anxiety, but the attention was intoxicating. She overrode it because of what she had been taught to feel what was right. She was, if you read this, she was terrified of this man.
1000%.
She was terrified of Hades, and she was told to be afraid of Hades. But the fact that he was giving her attention and he was doing all of these things to intentionally gain her favor was more important, right? She was people pleasing. She was fawning because she had no way and no education and no one telling her, like, this, when you feel this way, run. So
run. Yep.
So then I go on to talk about like sexual desire. She's 17. She's young. She's just, you remember being in your teenage years. You're just starting to feel the feels of like sexuality and sensuality. Then
100%.
I describe the actual party, or the actual, like, what they did for her birthday.
Right.
She's tense, she's anxious as she's on the chariot with him going down to earth, because he took her down from Mount Olympus, which to me is like you're dethroning her for the first time. You're taking her down from her mountain, from her palace, bringing her down to earth, almost to the underworld, but not quite, down to earth, right? And she's scared and like, she's nervous, but she starts to trust him. Then he's like, well, we have to be human for this. So they transform into humans. And there's a piece here where like she goes from being her dark skin to then she transforms into someone who's lighter skin. That looks more like an Aphrodite, which for her, she's like, I want to be beautiful. I see that Aphrodite is desire in all of this. And there's a line that says right before she transforms into human, this is my chance to be as beautiful as her. And so then she changes into like being more beautiful, what she considers to be beautiful, which growing up as a Black little girl, I wasn't taught to be proud of being Black. So I wanted for a long time, until I was like 18, 19 years old, to be lighter skin. And that's because of the anti-Blackness in our culture. Also like the media programming that we are like, that we ingest. That is like teaches us to favor and to want lighter skin, more European features. Colonization enforced that for us. Colorism, the whole nine. We could talk about racism till the cows come home. Like that was my first book, Afro-Latin Identity. So I don't want to talk too much about it, but it is part of her insecurities.
Right.
And then I talk about him being like turned on by seeing her in this way. Then they go to the bar. She's 17 years old. In the United States, the legal drinking age is 21. So she's with adults, right? She's barely of age to be involved in this scene. Then because she's afraid and the only person she knows is Hades, so that's her security. She's holding his hand, being near him, and he's providing security and reassurance. He's around other men that are checking her out, right? And then then they give her alcohol. And so with alcohol, her inhibitions are lowered. She's dancing. I actually put a nod to like the whole pomegranate thing by making it pomegranate sangria. Then she's dancing. He's watching her dance, becoming more turned on by him. She's becoming more and more intoxicated. So he takes the liberty of like complimenting her and continuing to like increase how inappropriate he's touching her. And then finally we get to him really flattering the crap out of her. She's basically like almost drunk. he takes her to somewhere like away from everyone else and draws her and encourages her to get into a robe and get naked and draws her. During this time, during the time that I was being groomed by my abuser, and then I was subsequently assaulted, I was an art model actually. I did a lot of art modeling in the summer of 2008. I was an art model in the art schools in New York City. So this is a direct nod to that time in my life. Art modeling for me was liberating, but it was also full of some shame because I was naked. I was naked in front of other people being drawn. My mom did not approve of this at all, and actually was like really offended me, by like calling me everything you can imagine that's a mother who is very Catholic would say to their daughter that she disapproves of. But it was also liberating. Like I felt beautiful, but I also was disassociated from my body. So it was a very interesting experience, and I wanted to write a little bit about it here in the book. In how he used this to groom her. Because with my abuser, like a big element was how like him telling me how beautiful I am, the photographs that I would take, and him commenting on this beauty, right? So there's more of this grooming as he is drawing her, becoming more and more and more inappropriate with how he is how he's talking to her. She's feeling the effects of the alcohol, but also of the turn on, the arousal. He apologizes supposedly for being so forward, but he's again pushing the boundaries, which again, talking about grooming, when someone who is grooming someone sexually, that's what they do. They push the boundary of sexuality and sexual innuendos to see how far they can get and to see if they can go all the way to where they want to go. So that's how I slowly do that, right? I didn't just jump into him having sex with her because what was the fun in that for him, right? And then finally he's actually touching her when she is naked. Again, not having sex with her yet. Alludes to like pregnancy and putting a baby in her, which is something that's a part of my own story. But then she goes completely still, and that makes her completely uncomfortable.
Yeah. And then she freezes. Yeah.
She freezes, and then he pulls away. He's like, all right, I might have done too much, right? Then at the end, he says, never tell anybody. And that is a big hallmark of abuse. Not just sexual assault, but most, if not all, abuse. Do not tell anyone. Secrecy, which is when we are told about like educating our children, we tell them about no secrets, because it's where it's in keeping secrets that then these things happen. So this is the instance where this becomes now dangerous. He told her, do not tell anyone that we went on this trip. Do not tell a soul. So now she's trapped.
Right.
Because that's like the one instance that he shows her and like kind of like bares his teeth, because he says it very menacingly, like, don't tell anybody. They'll never believe you.
Yes, and using that psychological manipulation against her around these preconceived narratives of, oh, she's crazy like her mother, which we know is just a trauma response, as you've mentioned earlier. This was, I think I made a lot of comments about a metaphorical katana being taken out at this point.
You went on a journey when you were editing my book. Like, I don't like, to everyone who's listening, like, if y'all was to read just Nicole's commentary when she was editing the book, this woman went on a journey.
It would go from like, hey, I think this comma right here might create more split in the, delineation of these two lines than might behoove you, to literally, I'm taking out a katana in preparation to battle these, in here, fictional fictional characters, but I also, while Carmen worked on this book and I was editing it, I got to learn more and more intimate details of Carmen's life. And so, yeah, this one was,
yeah. Yeah, and it's
it began the journey of it being really challenging, like not challenging to read because it wasn't well done. It was so well done. That's almost what made it that challenging to read, because it spoke to, yes, specific elements of your story and your experience, which is heart-wrenching, but it's heart-wrenchingly relatable and something that spoke to me and my experiences, and unfortunately, as we know, so many others. But my apologies, I didn't mean to.
No, please. So then I talk about Zeus and Hades conversation, and this is when I talk about more of the use of alcohol. Many times when people are being groomed, alcohol or some type of substance is involved, and it's very clear that it's intentional. I am getting this person intoxicated so that I can have what I want, which is to have sex with her. And it also, it's very brief, but him pushing the alcohol on her. Like, she says, I think I've had enough. And he says, keep drinking, with a little more force than what he thought, than what he should use. And then he says, good girl. Which I'm like, oh my God, the good girl, right? And so, more grooming, right? And then the conquest, which the conquest is incredibly graphic for anybody who wants to read the book.
Just strap in. I reread it in preparation for this, and just I had to put the book down. I was upset. Again, so well written, and even numerous times, to your point of the grooming, like I wrote down parts in this where he's even reflecting back on the long game. What was it? The long, excruciatingly slow long game. Oh my God. No, but that's exactly what it is.
It was the long game. He played the long game.
Yeah. And I think, if I may just quickly interject, something going back to the coming of age part 2 piece.
Yes, cool.
Specifically literary speaking, that stands out is that moment that we talked about where he implies, I could make you curvier by putting a baby in you. Would you like that? And that's where, Persephone's freezes. What struck me and was very emotional for me, and even with what you were sharing, how your mother disapproved of you being an art model, and I can only imagine also growing up in a Catholic home, those things that you were told, which a daughter should never hear, is this thought process halfway through the paragraph on 56, I'm a whore, she thought, and how she delineates her reaction to her being the problem, which is such a huge part, right, of grooming, to your point of seeking out somebody who is vulnerable. It's not just, when we talk about mental health, isolation, yes, being physically alone is a vulnerable position, but what that delineates more is even more vulnerability in being psychologically alone. Before that piece, Medusa, the young priestess, we understand the direct rape and sexual assault that Medusa goes through. That was really Persephone's only lifeline at that point. You mentioned it a little bit earlier in our conversation, that if she didn't have Medusa to talk to, then she really had nobody. Never mind the fact that, as we learn in Demeter La Loca, that as Persephone grows up to be older, especially right at that age where Demeter had Persephone's, there's an even bigger emotional and mental wedge driven between them. And in that piece, how we see the laying of the foundation, and this is something you do so beautifully throughout this piece, is you lay the foundation of not just how Hades slowly started to groom Persephone's, but how all of these elements of Persephone's life were crumbling and falling apart, were really failing her. We're abandoning her. We're neglecting her. and how her own mother used that language of slut shaming her daughter, for sitting on the lap of a god when she was a young child and accusing her of seducing that god. Whenever, again, to our larger conversation of patriarchy, this idea, this notion of attack the women, don't fault the man. Demeter exemplifies that in Demeter La Loca, of faulting her daughter for getting the attention of older men. And so that's how we see this full circle in this piece, how Persephone is so quick to blame herself.
Mm-hmm.
And that is absolutely psychologically indicative of, even if nothing physical happened, because I think a lot of the times people think about trauma, especially to females, of, oh, physical, something physical had to happen. And that's not disregarding the grotesque somatic limits and boundaries that are disregarded and inappropriately crossed here in this piece. And of course, later, the actual raping and the sexual assault. But a lot of the time, these traumas are emotional and mental. And I think that's where oftentimes these narrations of, oh, well, she's just crazy. Oh, well, you're just too sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
are easier to place on women, because we're often, and to your point, I'm glad we brought it up with Adonis. It's not just women, little boys are put into this as well. Though because of the societal structure that we live in, it favors them removing those feminine, more emotional, more softer sides of themselves. And so women are damned if they do, damned if they don't. If you're a hardened woman, you're angry, you're a bitch, you're not wife material, whatever new language we come up with, which is anti-woman. Or you lean into the femininity because you identify with it, but then you are made to be hyper vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
and psychologically, mentally, emotionally isolated. And so I found that language to be really important, especially when you brought up your own experience of being an art model. Unfortunately, it's something I've experienced as well. I wasn't an art model, but there's something to be said about when you're at an age and you start to, right, biology, you can't fight biology, you can't fight puberty. You're going to come of age at some point. You're going to start understanding and having connections with your body, and certain feelings that start coming about regarding just your own exploration of who you are. And yet there's like this hypersexualization of women, and yet this true hatred towards women for even exploring that in a natural, healthy way, and not, to your point, not giving those women the tools, those young girls the tools to then understand in that moment it wasn't her fault. Her body was not respected.
Mm-hmm.
She was literally, for all intents and purposes, she was drugged.
Yes.
Alcohol is a drug.
Yes. 100%.
Like, I don't, and that's the other thing is, like, I'm going off, so I'm just gonna
please
continue.
Go. This is why I asked you specifically.
But like alcohol, we have a weird relationship with alcohol in our society where we don't view it as a drug. And in the DSM-5 TR, it is absolutely 100% like one of the top like substances and drugs. And so I feel like when people think, oh, she was drugged, they think like, unfortunately, date rape drugs and things like that. No. This was a 17-year-old girl who was given alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
She was given alcohol 4 years before she could legally drink, and she was still 1 year away from being considered a legal adult.
Mm-hmm.
And even it kills me in the piece before Coming of Age Part 1, at the ending line, he further psychologically manipulates her by telling her no one will know we're gone.
And so when the actual like when 2008 I was 22, 23 years old. So I wasn't that far off. Like I'm going to be 40 in a couple of days. So I don't so from being 40, I don't consider a 20-year-old like a fully grown adult.
I don't know why we think 21, that's a random ass number. 21-year-old should not be allowed to drink. Like, I'm significantly, I'm younger, but I'm almost 30. And I look back to your point, 17 to 22, there was really not a huge difference other than I could go to a bar. Like, I don't say that with judgment. I don't say that with ill will towards those versions of myself, but like, really, I started coming into myself by doing the work that I had to do, and not to center my story, but like around like 24, that's really where the meat and potatoes started to come in. Like 22, I didn't know my head from my fucking ass.
Me either.
And again, I don't say that with any disregard towards people who are 22, that version of myself. Still, to your point, it's not that far off, especially when we want to talk about neurobiologically speaking. Your prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed. How can you don't have the full capabilities. You have some capabilities, but you don't have the full capabilities of critical thinking. You do not have the full capacity to distinguish, judgment in the terms of distinct manners of danger and not danger. And especially to bring it back to Persephone, when you're not fostered on how to connect with the spiritual intuition that we all have outside of our brain, you're vulnerable.
Exactly.
But
so,
yes.
Let's see, where are we now? So that takes us right up to when it switches.
The conquest.
Because after the conquest, the first and foremost, fuck you.
Yes. That's the best. I so appreciate that you did that as a writer, because after what you read, you're like, oh my fucking good golly. I need a cup of tea. I need a nap.
Cold shower.
I need something. But then you feel vindicated when you get to this page, because you're like, yeah, no, absolutely fuck you, Hades. And insert, any personal experience with any person. Yeah, no, that was a breath of fresh air. Thank you for putting that in, because that was essential.
For me, because like that, when in my therapeutic journey at the time, I finally got to the point where I was like, you know what, motherfucker, fuck you. And rage was such an important part of my journey, and that was why I even wrote this before I went on the rest of the journey, because there's more than half the book of what happens after, and I'm going to talk about why I made it more than half the book in a second. It was so essential for me to start the switch over to my point of view with rage, because I was unable to access my rage towards this abuser and to other abusive people in my life, until I was unable to access it for the better part of 10 years, over a decade, where I would feel some anger, but it was then, but he did it, like all the excuses, he didn't mean to, whatever, blaming myself, and something that I've read several times recently is like women suffer from autoimmune disorders more often because of how much emotions we trap, specifically rage and anger. We mistake sadness for anger, right? And so when I tapped into this anger, which I mean, it's just a lot, like 3 lines, right? First and foremost, fuck you.
But there's so much.
Desgraciado, which desgraciado in Spanish is like, desgracia means disgrace. So desgraciado is disgraceful. And it's also like very common in the Dominican culture, at least, to say desgraciado, like, so depending on the tone. And this one is like, no, like, fuck you. Like, fuck you. Fuck you. Dead ass. But rage was such a, like, I was first afraid of how angry I was, but when I finally felt the full extent of the rage and the anger of what happened to that version of myself, 24, 25-year-old version of myself, it was liberating. It really brought in the ability for me to properly grieve being abused in the way that I was by this man. It gave me the liberty to feel anger for other things in my life, without decimating certain relationships that anger was connected to, right? But really gave me the ability to feel the full extent of the injustices that I had suffered, not just by people, but by society, by the culture that I was brought up in, right? Because for as upset, the abuser aside, notwithstanding, all the other people that I can possibly name in my life that have hurt me, I was also able to see how they were products of the same environment, which is why when we talk about like all that glitters and why I sent that scene, right? Hera, like people in my life, parents, friends, extended family, people that have come and gone, they were all products of society, and we're in it. We're in the patriarchy. We're in the abusive, violent society that we're in. Some of those people are not in my life. Some of those people still in my life, right? But it helped me to contextualize. That rage helped me to contextualize, and it brought me back into my body. Like feeling the rage helped me move it out of my body. And then what ended up happening was that this abuser did come back into my life like 10 years later. And it was in that him coming back into my life very briefly that the anger really surged, and where it was like, how dare you? How fucking dare you? Are you fucking serious? With the help of actually, like, I spoke about our friendship earlier when I introduced you, but it also, what assisted my anger was other people being angry for me, which we see in the book later on, of someone being angry for something that happened to Persephone. I don't want to gloss over the abuse because it is like before we get to that part. But like just talking about those 3 lines, first and foremost, fuck you. Like, we don't see Persephone get angry until later on, but I wanted to make that switch between the third person to the first person point of view. You really helped me with that piece that comes after, which is what I remember, where like the rest of like after the conquest is told from Persephone's point of view, which is me. I am Persephone. You helped me like rewrite it, so it's like, let's really, like, I know what you're trying to do, which what I was trying to get at was talking about it from the disassociated point of view, because in my own memories of my abuse, I remember my abuse from out of my body. It wasn't until I started to do the healing work that I started to be more in my body. And so I wrote from that perspective what I remember. I talk about what she saw, the party. I then again bring up her hesitation to drink. I talk about sex and the sex that she had, which I'm going to graphic detail with the conquest. But I talk about how, again, because she had no education, she correlated being desired and wanted with love. So she fell in love with Hades.
Yes.
When she had this immensely intense sexual experience with Hades. Again, parallel to my own experience. I had grown up not knowing what sex was, not knowing what love was supposed to look like, only seeing the examples around me. So I felt what I thought was in love with this person. Later on, I would realize that I was actually obsessed and fixated and ruminating on this person. But I thought I was in love with this person, right? And then, this part is actually quite graphic, and like, I remember when I asked you to read the book, I'm like, I just need you to know that, like, I describe my rape and my sexual assault. And I did that because it was an important part of my journey writing this book when I came across a written account of Carmen, 22, 23, 25 years old, wrote what happened. and wrote it explicitly. And I had not read it actually, Nicole, until I wrote this book. And I actually, when I read it for the first time, I actually like was disassociated for like a day or two. I was not okay after I read it. But in my therapy, so I had mentioned my diagnosis before. I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and post traumatic stress disorder. Part of the best treatment, one of the best treatments for OCD is exposure response therapy. Exposure response being that you face what you are afraid of and you face what you are avoiding. So it's like, oh yeah, like how do you get over your fears? You face your fears. Haha, yay! And I'm like, oh, this is.
Yeah.
When they first told me what it was, like, oh, we're gonna do exposure response. I'm like, what is that? Like, oh, we're gonna face your fears. Oh, great. So like we're not gonna avoid. Great.
You're like, I actually think I'm fine. I think I'm okay because I don't need to do that.
No, but that was part of my exposure response was reading that.
Right.
And so then for reading it, I'm like, I have to include this because something that so the book is dedicated in the beginning to survivors. And and the reason why I wrote this book was for myself, but also for anyone else who wants to move out of survival into actually facing what happened to them. It's hard. It's challenging. When I was going through this, I was getting flashbacks. You know, like this wasn't fun. I was having nightmares. I was really not okay when I was healing from this, really fully healing from it in my body. But I wrote it so that it's real, right? Like this really happened to me. This is what happened. I embellish and I like make it mythological, but even when I'm talking in the book about her chest splitting open, that was a direct description of how I felt for many years. I felt like my chest had been ripped open. Like obviously I'm whole, but spiritually, whenever I would look down on myself, I would see a gaping hole in my chest. In the book, she actually gets ripped apart and killed, right? He kills her. And that's when he rapes her. Right after he rapes her. He rapes her because she laughs at him. So this reminds me of something that, like a quote that I don't know who the quote is, but it says like, men are afraid of being laughed at and being rejected and ridiculed by women. Women are afraid of being killed. And so I didn't intend to write that scene with that quote in my head because actually when I was assaulted, it was very like it was like the skeleton of it was what I actually ended up writing. But in the moment, I laughed out of nervousness, and then immediately after, there was anger from his part, and then I was assaulted. And so that's what I write in the book. And in the book, I also write, which was also healing and difficult for me. I watched as I was raped by the love of my life. And I know that rape and sexual assault looks very different in many different contexts, but in my specific lived experience, to be raped by someone that I thought I was in love with is by far one of the most painful experiences that I've had in my life. And hugely disorienting and very, very painful. You know, like we are hurt by the people that we love, by our care providers, all of that. And that in and of itself can be traumatic, but reconcilable with apologizing and rupturing of repairs. But to be sexually assaulted by someone that you are head over heels low with, like that is a pain that I don't wish on anyone. Like, and it's sad because most sexual assault cases are with people that are known. It's not the boogeyman in the alleyway. Many, many, many people I know who have been sexually assaulted or hurt have been hurt by a relative, a caregiver, a boyfriend, a marital rape and coercion. But so I wrote that piece, right? As it goes on, and you can, if you have any questions or you want to interject, please let me know. Then I talk about when she's in the underworld and listening to Hera and Athena, who Athena is the architect of why Medusa is who she looks like, because in the original myth, Poseidon had his eye on Medusa, and at the time, Poseidon, who is the god of the ocean, is at odds with Athena because they're going back and forth. They're brother and sister as well. And so his way of getting back at Athena was through Medusa. So it was like killing two birds with one stone. He rapes Medusa, and Athena finds out that she gets raped in her temple, and instead of being like, you raped my priestess, she punishes Medusa. And so this is why Athena and Hera are speaking with each other, right? Because they're basically two peas in a pod. And Athena,
Right.
traditionally at least, Athena is seen as like a goddess that women revere and are like very proud of, and it makes sense. She's a warrior, prince, goddess, and all of these things. But for me, I'm like, I cannot gloss over the fact that you punished Medusa for being assaulted. In the very same way that in our current reality, people who are assaulted, like recently we had like he who should not be named case, right? The very public cases after the Me Too movement of women coming out and speaking about their experiences with men that has sexually assaulted them, and them being crucified in like the court of public opinion. Like, you must have wanted it was your fault. Like, no empathy, and then worried more about the reputation of the man who committed this crime versus how the woman went through. So in this scene in the underworld, I wanted to show like oftentimes like we have this rhetoric and women are tearing other women apart. Then I have Artemis, who is like also the voice of like the women that are concerned, like the people that are like, I'm worried that something happened, and they they brush her off. And in that piece you see Persephone continuing to succumb to like, was it my fault? Like, did I do something wrong? Like, did I provoke him? Right? She's just
this internal gaslighting.
She's just newly dead, if you will, in the underworld.
Right.
And I did, and I was intentional about showing the underworld because I felt half dead for a lot of the time after I was assaulted. And it wasn't enough for me to just write a book like, this happened to me. Like, no, I want you to see what I went through. Like, because I have a poem, it's a pretty short poem, where I talk about, like, I think the line is, like, we prefer survivors half dead because they're easier to cope with or deal with. Hold on.
Yes.
Okay. Survivors speak. I speak to you from the other side, foreign shores strange to those who have not made it across the river Styx. I knew enough about death to have carried out my own funeral rites and put a coin in my mouth. We love survivors because it saves us the work of embalming them. Half dead is preferable. The strength it takes to survive is assumed to be enough to continue in the world of the living. And that's how I felt for a long time. And that's like, with all respect to people who are survivors and consider themselves survivors, when we look up the word survive, to be in survival mode means that you are just making it. You are just clinging to life. And when you are in survival mode, for many of us, you're not able to be your best. You are just staying alive. Right? And so I wrote that poem, very short but poignant, to talk about like, where and what other spaces, unless we create those spaces, do we talk about what comes after you survive that? After you survive assault, after you survive trauma. Most of it is like, oh, we're just survivors. But to survive is the bare minimum. But we like to, you survived that? Here's a medal. Like, you're great, you're amazing for surviving that. But we don't ever then, where do we make the space for the grief of something that really, that died? For me, I died. Some part of me died when that happened.
Yeah.
And I was in the underworld. So I go on with the book, talking about her journey through the underworld. In the underworld, she sees Medusa. I have to say, that was one of my favorite pieces to write. the piece where I write about her encountering Medusa, because
Yeah.
that was again like the rage, like that was rage, pure unadulterated rage that Medusa was speaking on. Like, I might even read the piece at some point, because I loved writing it, because again it was like more space for me to write how I felt, right? I was speaking in Medusa's voice, where we finally give Medusa a voice, right? There's so much Greek mythology. It's, we talk about Medusa, but when does Medusa speak about what happened to her? And so in that, it's like the first glimpse that Persephone gets of rage. Which in my own journey, and I started to see an example of that. A friend of mine at the time had experienced assault and was very vocal about her rage and her anger about it. So that started to crop up for me in my life, in my healing journey, of like seeing people be outraged about this, right? Then I go on to let me open up this book, because I'm gonna pretend like I know this by heart. Then I talk about what happened to me after. So I have poetry talking about how I felt, what I was feeling. Poetry has always been my vehicle of being able to express my deepest feelings. I talk about how numb I felt. I talk about how my mother reacted to my assault, and how she, like, you used to be so sweet, what happened to you, and feeling like a corpse and feeling stiff. In the beginning of the book, I talk about dancing. There's something that I stopped doing for a long time when I was assaulted. And that's not a unique experience. I've heard of other people who have been assaulted who stopped doing things that they love. I remember that I went to a conference with Black Women's Blueprint, and it was like a tribunal for like sexual assault victims at the hands of white supremacy in the country. And there was someone that played the violin, and their story was that that event was the first time that they had played the violin since they had been assaulted. And I remember when I feeling and tearing up when I got that piece of information, because it's like what we are robbed of when we go through these things. You know, like, people stop painting, they stop dancing, they stop laughing, they stop making music. These things that are like core and central to our identities, that are like bring us joy, like we were talking about when we were talking about my book cover, that bring us pleasure outside of sexuality and the male gaze. Like, we stop doing them because our spirit, like I can't even fully articulate, like, your spirit is broken. You feel
100%
like violated and ripped apart, and like it hurts to do it. Like, you don't even, like, you're in such a depressive state, literally in your underworld, like you are half dead, you know. So like, then I finally, when I started to heal, is when I started dancing again. Like, actually, before while I was waiting on us to be ready to be able to make this call, I actually put on one of my favorite songs in the whole wide world, and I was dancing this morning. And that comes more easily to me now that I am more in my body. And so I talk about Medusa and her rage. God, I feel like I'm probably gonna, you know what? I'm gonna read this piece. I just love this piece. So it's, after walking for endless hours through the caverns of this wretched place, I heard the distant sound of snakes hissing. My hair stood on end. I wanted to turn around, but my body kept moving. I came to the place where the sound came from, and I froze. The shape of a woman with her hair slithering in all directions had her back to me. A head full of snakes spoke, and I recognized the voice immediately. Medusa? They called you a beast too, huh? Because you tore at your skin afterward? The way you kept screaming and wanting to rip his eyeballs out made you ugly. How did you know? Did you hear me screaming? I bet you roared something terrible and awesome. I bet they called you a liar when you wailed. So they stuffed your mouth with your own bloodied clothes that he viciously ripped from you before he raped you. Right? Calladita, te ves más bonita. At least that's what they said to me when they found me. What happened to you? My old friend took a drag of her cigarette, her face pale with a sickly green tone to it, eyes lined heavily with black charcoal, gray tattered priestess robe that was in shreds. She looked into a mirrorless vanity table and painted her lips fire, fluffed her mane of snakes, shielded her eyes with sunglasses, and looked at me. I heard what happened to you, Persephone. And how did they reward you? She scoffed. The gods? The fucking gods? What good will they be in delivering your justice? You heard the story, right? Fuck Poseidon and Athena. What good was it to have been her devoted priestess when this is how I am repaid? I pay the price for my violation. I am the sacrificial lamb to petty gods. She spits this out, foaming at the mouth with the rage that sits in her chest. Who the fuck is supposed to protect us when the goddesses step aside and let their brothers have their way with us? When a god rapes a mortal in the temple of her familiar, who do we seek salvation from? My death, Medusa ashes her smoke, will be inconsequential. Decorum more important than vindication. The fates told me how all this ends. Another man finishes the job. I'll be murdered as part of his quest. Cuts off my head, uses it as a weapon. I finally learned how to give good head. She laughs sardonically. How, my old friend Persephone, will they repay you for paying the ultimate price? I'll tell you what I became. Vipers, black diamondbacks, and black mambas sprung from my skull as I screamed endlessly from the pain. The rattlesnakes shook violently as she spoke. And even if I found another brave soul to look at me for all I became, I turned them to stone. So I went to the ends of the earth and stayed there. I am the monster. I am who should be feared. How? Feared for how I combed my hair, how I was dressed in my ceremonial robes? Is it because one of the few things men fear is rejection? Did I humiliate a god by saying no? A woman devoted to herself in the midst of a god seeking revenge against a goddess is not a danger. No, she said, pulling herself up to her full weight, hair wild, hissing, ready to strike. I am the monster because I speak the truth. I cannot be hidden, so rather I am feared and hunted because of your piece of shit uncle and your traitor of an aunt, because this is how the world has been fashioned by the head rapist in command. Why did we think anyone would be safe? I love that piece.
If that piece doesn't make you feel righteous rage, I don't know. I don't know. Because to so much of what you were saying about rage being an important aspect of your healing journey, and it's evidently reflected throughout the latter half of the book, or rather not half, it's to your point a little bit more than half of the book, but I digress. You know, as I was thinking about this book and as I was reading pieces in preparation for our little recording chat, I was thinking about, I was like, yes, this book centers on the crux of this grooming, the sexual assault, which then does turn into eventually being raped in the underworld before being killed. And I don't say this to disregard all of those details nor your lived experiences, though I think that something bigger that you're getting at, that you're able to capture so beautifully, is that this is about all of the pieces before and ultimately, more importantly, the aftermath. Because like you said earlier, where do we talk about the aftermath? We don't. I've heard how many stories, how many people I know who have been violated. My own story, not having a place. You know, I think it's often, even people with the best of intentions, it's like, okay, what can we do to give this person resources to remedy so that they can just go on with their life? And again, I don't disregard that those people might have good intentions, but we know what they say about intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's about impact. And so something that I found so powerful was the righteous rage that you were able to elicit through your wordsmith, by wielding your words and by wielding the story. Not only did it bring up memories, and to your point, like flashbacks and nightmares and a strange non-linear narration in my own head of old ways of thinking of myself and connecting with myself. But it also helped me to feel rage for you. It helped me to feel rage for other people. And like you were talking about, it helped me to access a level of rage and grief that I hadn't ever, you said it so perfectly, that I was afraid of. And even in that piece that you just read with Medusa, because how often, right? And I don't need to tell you this, how often are we told that if we access that anger and that rage, that we're just, you're an angry, hardened woman. You're a bitch. You're difficult. You know, especially these social tropes of being an angry woman. And this was a very cathartic read. And excuse me, just adjusting these. It was a very cathartic, okay, I don't know if that helped. There we go. It was very cathartic in so many ways. It was really devastating. But I think as you've just reread that piece and as I'm thinking about this, I think one of the things that was the most devastating was that for so many years, I didn't allow myself to be angry for the things that had happened to me and for the things that have happened to my friends and for the things that unfortunately are happening consistently still to this day because of how this society is structured, because of our quote unquote so-called justice system. Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite pieces.
I love that piece.
And then I love that it comes after, what comes after the shit the patriarchy is on. That's one thing I did want to quickly comment on. In mirroring the rage, there were so many moments of, and I know it was just you being you, but there was so many tasteful bits of humor and your personality. And to your point, I think we saw that shine more, just the same way you were able to heal through this more and be able to dance a bit more and start doing the things that you enjoyed. It felt more, we heard more of your voice, not just because it was in first person, but we heard more of who you are in this latter part of the book. With things like the
I'm looking at the piece Dark versus Light. I think this piece is hilarious. This is the funniest piece. It's serious because if you read it, you're like, she's really saying some shit. But like,
no, absolutely. But the opening lines,
yo,
go for it.
Oh, what the fuck is God? Respectfully,
like
and
philosophically,
honestly, right? Like this entity, dead ass, said that to be like, Alright, first of all, that's lit as fuck. But that ass, like, that's pretty lit.
It is. And then also as like a literary thing, I appreciate that's lit as fuck. Literally, it's lit, but also that's just how that's you.
That's how I
just
talk.
being like, no, let's just level here for a second. Like, let's just think about this. And so I think that's something that really helps to drive this story as well. Not that we need to sugarcoat, because we certainly do not sugarcoat the rage and the abuse. And yeah, we certainly don't sugarcoat. Since we're in the middle of the book, I had to take a breath because I was like, let me not get ahead of myself here. We certainly don't sugarcoat that. But what does show is what we were talking about earlier, is this level of resilience. And that, to your point, really is accessed a lot more. I think to be a survivor, and at least I'll speak from my own experience, there is a certain level of resilience that is required in surviving, because you have, like, right? Surviving is the bare minimum to just keep going and keep going. And it does take a certain level of resilience to keep going once you've had a part of yourself taken from you, to use your words, to have a part of yourself that's died, that's gone to the underworld. There's a certain level of resilience, I think, of like the weight of having to even pick up your feet to move through life. But then when you transition, and that rage helps to access, to your point, you know, to go back to the beginning of what we were talking about, to help you undrown yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
To help you undrown yourself so that resilience doesn't feel laborious. It doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel, at least, again, speaking in my experiences, I welcome for you to challenge them if you experienced it differently. But at least for myself, as I allowed myself to feel more rage and more grief, I was able to your point, get into my body, to feel sensations that were wildly uncomfortable, that I had no idea were there, to pull from this like molten lava almost, that felt like was brewing inside of me. And I'm trying to like correlate it with one of the lines that you wrote here in the Conquest. There is a small hole there, a small hole grew and opened. Excuse me, let me start again. There, a small hole grew and opened the ground up in a fury, and the molten red insides of the earth staring back at him. And then in What I Remember, starts off beautifully with that same imagery, but on the other perspective, the earth swallowed me. And it was almost like that, once I could access that rage and be in my body, I started feeling the depths, and almost like for a long time, it felt like a limitless access of like an erupting volcano. And once I could get all of that out, knowing the capacity to survive that, because that was almost scarier to face the truth of my emotions than to continue just walking around at a baseline, because at least I knew what that baseline was. I knew how to navigate the world at that baseline. And so I guess where I'm coming from with this resilience is like that resilience is almost unmasked. And then you really see what your resilience level is once you're able to break out of that survival mode, like you said, and not just be at a baseline, but be thriving.
The fullness of
not
yourself.
to say that yes. And yeah, I think for me, when we're talking about trauma and rage and all of these other symptoms, like you had mentioned, nightmares and dissociation and even the creation of your own world, it does make me think of, and I'm not someone to lean towards pathology, though I can't help but correlate with things that I'm learning about. I'm literally taking a trauma class right now of the intensity of PTSD and how trauma impacts neurobiologically the brain, and how even after a traumatic event, neurobiologically your brain is different. It doesn't mean that it's broken. It doesn't mean that it's not working. It's working just fine to protect you, but it's different. The way you even the way you access your memories, the way you interact with your memories.
I was journaling. I think I spoken to you yesterday about journaling.
Mm-hmm.
And I went over it. I looked at it this morning, and something that I wrote was a fragmented self. And what you're describing is that trauma fragments you.
Yes.
Not only,
which is interesting.
Not only do you leave your body, which is a form of fragmentation, but it, like, some people can't remember their memories. Like, our brains try to protect us sometimes and black out memories. Like, there's a very clear delineation of, like, who I was before, who I was after, you know, like
a timestamp. Yes.
In a way that is not the same as, like, I think about, like, yes, I had other traumas that led up to this abuse, but that abuse that I had with this specific abuser broke me in a way that no other abuse outside of, like, experiencing abuse as a young child did, because there was that switch between what, for me, very clear delineation between 5 and 6 years old, and then a very clear delineation between who I was right before I was assaulted in 2010 and who I've become.
Right.
And then having to, like, join up all of this disjointed self, this fragmented self. Like, I'm doing that now slowly and, like, you know, more efficiently. But there's very, like, when I look at the timeline of my life, there are very clear breaks. And so, like, that is what you're talking about. Like, when neurobiologically, like, things break. And thank God for neuroplasticity, and those of us who access neuroplasticity and being able to, like, rewire neurons in our brain to be able to fire differently. But it definitely, like, I think that there have been pictures of, like, the hippocampus before and after trauma that show what it does to the brain. Like, it's really serious stuff. It's not just, oh, I went through this. Like, your brain and body went through it.
Yes. And it's so... Thank you for using the word fragmentation, because something I learned about that, literally how we access memory, to exactly the point you're talking about of how we black out memory when we have these events of trauma. It's a scientific phenomenon that they label, like, you create sensory fragments, because it's easier for the brain, instead of, like we did with this recording, instead of hitting record and ending at the end of the event, our brain is being flooded with different hormonal receptors to convey to us we're not safe. So we're shutting down any non-essential part of our brain, and stopping and starting the recording of this event is not essential. What is essential for our survival, to be able to fight, flight, to freeze, to fawn, is our senses are working. So we know, do we smell, and this is obviously back to, like, primal times and our more, our more indigenous ways, when we were living on the earth and we were much more connected to threats in that regard, when our, let me not go through the history of human brain evolution, but these sensory fragments are created because that's what's more important to the brain functioning, is what can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell? What do I touch? And because, of course, those are all controlled in the same part of the brain, that's why you even reading the details, the journal entries of what you wrote when you were 25 about what had happened, brought you back this flood of memories, these flood of probably senses, maybe even, I don't want to dictate for you what that experience was like, but my point is, it's very interesting, and I'm glad you used the term fragmentation, because you're absolutely right. And that's literally what neurobiologists talk about, is that we create these sensory fragments of trauma, which is why it's so important in these spaces. And this is something I'm hoping to talk a little bit more about with you towards the end of our time. You know, when we create spaces where we can have conversations about trauma and support people in navigating trauma, not just simply asking, oh, well, what happened? That's not an effective way of getting the trauma story. And that's why I think this book is so effective at eliciting a wide variety of emotions. There were times where I felt fear. There were times where I felt so much rage. So many times I felt rage. So much anger. I was so angry all the time.
The whole
but
time.
also sometimes,
The whole time.
just from start to finish, I was mad at the serving of the looks. No, I'm kidding. No, but from truly so much
From the
anger.
beginning.
But my point is, yeah, no, from the beginning, definitely. And then even those moments of levity, like the piece that you're like, yo, who or what the fuck is got, like that, because I could hear it in your voice and I knew you, and I was like, yes, okay, I'm here for this. But that's also a great way of putting it. All of these emotions, because you're getting the trueness of this trauma story, which isn't just this singular traumatic event, although it's so important and is unfortunately an individually universal experience. You're conveying the totality of it, the holistic nature of it, and not just, oh, well, how did we get here? It was a true proper story arc and a true hero story of how did we get here? What's the crux of this story's event? And also, how do we resolve this? Because for so many, I feel like so many stories where I've read of, there have been very few stories where I've read where women have been assaulted and there's been proper resolve. Not that I'm the one to dictate what resolve looks like, but any acknowledgement of a resolve. There's only one other essay outside of your book that I can think of that acknowledges a resolve regarding rage and the proper stages of grief, really.
I wish that there was more. And that's why one of the reasons I wrote this book, because we deserve more.
Mm-hmm.
We deserve more. I'm thinking about the rest of the book and everything else that comes after. And it's why it's so actually fitting that I'm talking to you, because a big part of Persephone's healing journey was her giving birth, but also her relationship with Hecate. Which is what comes next, which is this like deep remembering, right? So like, without talking too deeply about some stuff in our friendship, but something that we hold in our friendship is this connection and remembering of like the earth, of the like ancient wisdom of like what belongs to us, right? So when I introduce Hecate into the book, right, I'm with the resolve that you're talking about, tying that into the conversation. We also don't have enough, or we are starting to see more emergence of people that are like, this is our birthright. Like this, we used to have matrilineal societies. We used to have matriarchal societies. We used to have rituals and spaces and ceremonies for grief, right? And when she begins to speak, she talks about that part of me that sought out, like right after I got assaulted, a couple years later, I then went to and became a midwife. And so a lot of my healing came going into the oldest job in the world, one of the oldest, if you will, which is helping women. And in this book, Hecate is the midwife. And so in bringing Hecate in as the midwife part of me, which ended up being a huge part of my healing journey, is being with women, being with people who had to tell me about what happened to them, and that was what was going to hold them back from giving birth. Seeing that in action, being their safe space, seeing that people be like trapped by that and not be able to give birth. The people that I met and the spaces I was part of, us meeting because of midwifery and then having this common thread and this common story. And then my own midwife at Ileana's birth was actually the model for Hecate. I love that woman so much. It's something that we have missing. Like, how do we, those of us that go into thriving, how are we conveying this medicine, this story, this rage, this space of like, we've done this before. Men have subjugated us. This is the story of patriarchy, and this is what you need to know to get through this trauma, so that you are not just so that you are not feeling like what's happening to you is happening in a vacuum, but that it's grounded in this age-old story of struggle, right? And so that's how we first are introduced to her. And her voice is very steady and grounded throughout the book, and she talks about like witnessing the countless rape and assault on the earth, but also her deep knowing that like the patriarchy's been around for a long time, but it was never, it was always meant to be destroyed. And then after we are introduced to Hecate, we then start to talk about like matrilineal, matriarchal, like generational, intergenerational. So this is when we then start to, I have a poem about like a woman who's being cheated on, like her mother and her grandmother and grandmother and mother and mother and more mother and mother and generation. And actually, recently I gave a lecture on patriarchy, where a lot of us are trained to believe, oh, patriarchy is like this relatively new thing. I'm like, no, we're talking about like Hammurabi's code, which we're talking about like Mesopotamia. So we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of years, which means we're talking generations and generations of this, right?
Yes.
Where then I start to talk about like not just this, it's things that have happened to me before I got to this point. Then I have the piece on Adonis. And I think this is one of the first times that I wrote about like little boys and men, because in my own experiences, like I write here, like some of the little boys that have been violated grew up to be the men that I've slept with, and then told me in pillow talk that this is what happened to them. And so I go and I wrote that because it's funny, as I go on with the rest of the book, yes, there's rage for what happened, but then there's this deep level of empathy that still allows me to hold men and patriarchy accountable. But it's also like, I'm not just the victim. Women are not just the victim, but this is something that we're baking together, right? And so then there's more of like this ancestral knowing, talking about like forgetting. So there's a poem about like how could you forget your mother, not just like your actual mother, but the Mother Earth. Then we go to Aphrodite, the beautiful goddess of beauty, the beautiful whore. Yes. And I talk about her relationship to her husband and to Ares, which I think is interesting. That Greek mythology made the goddess of love fall in love with the god of war. And so here I actually depict her as a victim of domestic violence, where she's at her vanity table covering her bruises, which then again explains why she did what she did to Adonis. And I'm not trying to brush through the book, but there's just like a lot of it is just is that like really validating. Then I have a piece about my abuser, where I directly am talking about him, which is the piece Puerto Rico. And this piece is like the closest that I get to being very, very like direct about who this person was. I continue on and I talk about the love that I felt for him, where I speak of in the love of my life, Hades. And that's where I, like, when I had mentioned earlier, like, he was the love of my life. I was deeply and madly in love with him. I was obsessed with him. I was obsessed with the idea of him. I was addicted to the way he made my body feel. Like, that is what I felt. Right. And then you start to see more my rage come in. Then I have the series of the 4 pieces of Dear Patriarchy. Which I remember when you told me that you had shared this with your partner, and that he said, this is the first time that I have ever heard someone talk about this way. And I wasn't writing it to like get like that type of accolade from a man. Like, this is how I genuinely feel about patriarchy. Like, the first one is like, you have hurt my brothers, and you've like caged their emotions, and you have them on a diet of aggression. You know, like, and the deep level of empathy and grief I feel for men. Then I talk about a little. I think with the Dear Patriarchy pieces, I do this very delicate balancing act of accountability, empathy, and rage, which I think I actually wrote this. I didn't write this for new. These are pieces that I wrote years ago. I didn't know that. Yeah, that just so happened to fit in here. And then the last piece, I think, of Dear Patriarchy is the most like, oof. Yeah. Where I'm like, yeah, like, this is not just you. This is what I'm done with. This is what I've allowed, and this is where it ends. Yes. I don't know if you want to...
These letters are a warning, not a plea.
Right, so like the anger is like escalating. I'm escalating a little bit. Then I have a piece about Jesus Christ, and where I talk about, like, we honor this man, which, you know, no shade to Jesus. Like, Jesus is the homie. No. It's the big homie.
Love Jesus.
But...
I love both of our reactions.
The big homie.
No shade.
No shade to Jesus, but I talk about...
He's the big cheese.
Right, the big J, you know? But I talk about in this poem, like, about, yes, like, this is somebody that is honored in thousands of Christianity, but there's so many of us that make the sacrifice of almost dying, right? So a nod to, like, mortality, like, maternal mortality. Then as it goes on, I'm starting to gain, like, power. So I have, like, the woman who refuses to be broken in, where more of that rage is becoming, like, self-empowerment. I have a piece about grief, which I love this piece about grief, because this is how I feel about grief, definitely. Then who I am, I love this piece. And the woman that comes out of my mouth is the woman I've wanted to be. Something inside me, like the remnants of patriarchy, shakes in fear that I really am that powerful if left undisturbed and untamed. I could take out an entire system. I realized I used to say I was sorry so often so someone wouldn't make me sorry, in fear that the honesty would anger someone with an iron fist. Bloodied or not, the truth is mine to speak. So when the woman that needs to come out of my mouth says her piece, what is left is deafening silence, is the voices of the woman killed before they could get the words out. You finna get yourself killed for what you be saying, child. They will kill me either way. At least let me go out screaming.
And screaming I was after that piece, because there was such an inherent part of me that, how do I describe this? So many layers of me were seen in that short poem. So many layers of who I am. And especially for the neurodivergent folks, we know what it means to mask. And I know that's not quite so many layers of who I am, who I have been, felt seen in this, especially with the added layer of, like, we are both neurospicy individuals, and we talk a lot about in our friendship, like, the purpose of masking and unmasking. And of course, this is a huge piece. not exclusively about being neurodivergent, but just as a woman no longer being held to the chains of patriarchy, just being raw, unabashedly true and honest. The line here, I mean, so many, but the line here that really, really kills me is, I realized that I used to say I was sorry so often, so someone wouldn't make me sorry, in fear that the honesty would anger someone with an iron fist. Yeah, like, whew, the amount of times that I've held back saying what needs to be said, and even the one more line. I'm sorry, I know I'm getting into the nitty gritty of things. It's just, this is like a literary smorgasbord. It's just so wonderfully written. What is left in the deafening silence is the voice of the women killed. Like, are you kidding me?
Just casually, you know.
And then for all of that to lead up, what you did so beautifully was the order of the prose and the poetry throughout the book, but especially to your point, like from Dear Patriarchy on, because to your point, it's not just rage the whole rest of the book. It is a beautiful depiction of the true essence of post-trauma and just even the human experience of the ebbs and flows of emotions, and how through emotional maturity and through this work of moving through grief, we can begin to say, okay, I'm not necessarily just letting go of this anger. I'm maybe letting go of the hotness of this anger, but I'm taking this anger with me with the maturity of understanding the complexity of who else is harmed, who else is, what was the term I was looking for? Who else is, like, caught in the crossfires of this. The versions of myself who've been caught in the crossfires of this. It's just... and then we get to the birthing scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is all basically me talking about the way I gave birth, and this is the first time that somebody showed rage for what happened to Stephanie.
Yes.
And how she didn't know she was pregnant until she felt contractions. The whole time she was in the underworld.
Wild.
Which for my first pregnancy, like, I was very disassociated from my body, so that was kind of like a nod to that.
Okay.
When I'm talking about, like, her banging her fist on the side of the tub and screaming at the top of her lungs, that's what happened when I gave birth. So that's a direct thing I said. The description of Hecate as the midwife is the description of the midwife at my second birth.
Shout out.
When Persephone gives birth and she says that she felt the hair of the baby in her fingers, I caught my daughter's head. So that's, again, directly what happened to me. And then the rest of it is just the fact that she had given birth to the Furies. And I did that because it's like, she gave birth to the Furies, like the children of Hades, right? But in giving birth to Fury, also her, like, giving birth to what freed her ultimately. Then I continue on and I speak a little bit about, like, I speak more about, like, black maternal health in one of my poems. I talk about my own midwifery journey, and I write poetry I add poetry that I wrote while I was in midwifery school from the children I've caught. I wrote that in midwifery school, and for the women of Ciudad Juarez, which were the women that I served in midwifery school. And then I have a piece about afterbirth. I like this piece. You will find yourself washed ashore with a small body of your body pressed against yours for survival. They call the place you've woken up in motherhood. All the others have found their footing. Some needed hip replacements, an infinite stretch of orange pill bottles, wine bottles, and other delicious medications, an emotional support child. Others figure out how to wear the weight, supported by others, or out of spite. Is there anything else like becoming a mother that destroys and resurrects you over and over again?
Yes.
I still can't get over how big of a deal they make about this Jesus cat, and that motherfucker never even gave birth.
And that's where I love the, like, so poignant and poetic and serious and deep and philosophical, and then, which is so you, and also this last line is so you, and it's truly, you get to a place as a reader, you feel like you're almost traveling through these stages of emotions, and perhaps I'm biased, but I will say this. I would go out on a limb to say, as a reader, you feel as though you are in it and traveling. You are not just observing what Persephone is going through mentally and emotionally. Of course, you're not in that moment physically going through the things she's going through, but you're as in it as you possibly can be. And why I say that at this point with this poem is because you start getting to a point of, dare I say, like, levity. Like, that ending line is serious, but there's also a little bit of levity in that, and it's a little jovial because, especially as a woman reading this, and to be fair, I'm not a mother, so I haven't crossed that journey yet, though as a woman who wants to be a mother, I look at that and I can laugh and have a sense of slight understanding, not the full totality of understanding that women who are mothers can have. But in that laughter and that levity, it's almost giving, when somebody does something ridiculous and you just kind of like chuckle to yourself, and you don't like, you keep it pushing, but you just kind of chuckle to yourself and you're just like, oh, okay. Yep. So that's a thing. And I'm just going to keep on keeping on. But that, like, noted, like, clocked it. And it's also just a beautiful callback to the poem, The Savior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I did it. Cause, I mean, I'm good at doing that throughout the book. So then,
yeah,
and we're coming up on way over time, the time that we said we wanted to, but I think we've had a wonderful discussion. But the last couple things that are left in the book is Demeter, which we haven't really talked too much about Demeter. And,
I was gonna say,
and it's Demeter Revisited, and then we talk about the catharsis.
the reason to read this book
is the cathartic scene. So I just want to check in with you, Mo. Yeah. If you're listening to this right now, this is not us talking about the book directly. I want to check in with you. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. Where do you want to go with this? How are you feeling? I can go for a little bit while longer, but then I have to go take care of myself biologically.
I was going to say, I don't want to hold you up for any needs, biological, whatever they may be. I think that we're at a good place where if we talk a little bit about Demeter and the end piece, the end all be all, the glory, the reason I live and breathe, murdering Hades. Because really my thought was that we would just talk about Demeter, talk a little bit about, we've touched on it a little bit already, but talk a little bit about like mother wounds and birth and that connection. And then, the ending piece, I just had a final question of like thoughts on how we could make more spaces for these stories in our current society. Sure. That was really all I had left. So if you want to take a break now, we can. No, if you'd rather just keep going. Let's power through.
So, okay. Revisiting Demeter, that piece is very important to me. So I want to say that, like, this book was scary for me to write. One, because I was scared of my abuser's reaction, and two, because I was afraid to put out writing about the mother wound and pieces of my relationship with my mother.
Right.
But this was my experience of my mom. So in Demeter Revisited, I feel that it's the greatest redemption arc in the whole book ever, which is why her mother was the way that she was. In that piece,
Yes.
you learn what happened to Demeter, and then you actually witness Demeter rise up and go looking for her daughter and totally like rip the doors off of who everybody thinks she is. She gets in Zeus's face, she gets in Hera's face, like she is relentless, right? And it's done, and I do it in this form of Persephone being at the River of Remembrance. I don't want to butcher the name. I think it's Mimana's. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. But it's one of the rivers in the underworld, and she does it by remembering, which we were talking about earlier about like these matrilineal lines of Hecate. Like she goes into basically Demeter's memory and starts to see Demeter's life through Demeter's perspective, basically.
Yeah.
In drinking this water. And in that piece I talk about like the pain and the of being her daughter that she experienced, but ultimately by the end of her recalling and seeing the way Demeter was treated, seeing how Demeter herself experienced the assault, which by the way, some of the details that I write about Demeter's life are not necessarily all the details of my mother's life. But so we see that Demeter was assaulted. We see the memories that Demeter has of like hurting her child in the ways of what she said about Demeter, and pushing her away. And then we see the more recent memories of her searching for her daughter. And in that, not only are you seeing Demeter for this full woman that she is, but then we're also seeing Persephone forgive her mother. For now that she had gone through this cycle of womanhood, now she's seeing her mother through this new lens of like, we have all been wronged, even one of the people that wronged me, which is an experience that I have had in my own life with my mom. Like I've went from having a difficult, challenging like experience of my mother to coming to a place of I can acknowledge what hurt me, but also understanding how we were all victims of our circumstances, and then accepting what is and who she is and who I am. And the mother wound is probably the oldest wound that we all have, right? And how so many of us are nothing like our mothers, but exactly like our mothers. And
yes, indeed.
And the fact that like our mothers also suffer from mental health disorders, they unfortunately don't have the gift that we have of being able to go to therapy, of being able to be open and like claim and like do that, where at least I'm seeing my mother doing it later in her life. I'm like 20 something years younger than her, having been able to start that journey much sooner. I even think about the fact that like women were just recently in like the last 100-something years able to buy houses, able to have credit cards. Like there's so much circumstantially that women still healed. It's not like women were never healing at all, because we all resisted the patriarchy. But just thinking about like in the context that we're living in today, the freedoms that were denied women to be able to do the things that we do, right? And that then for me created, for Demeter and for the women in my life who are older, empathy. Like you're just actually witnessing some of us younger generation do these things, and then realizing you can do it for yourself. And so with Demeter, I feel like I do a great job of depicting mental health disorder, specifically like bipolar disorder. Of like when earlier in the book, I talk about like the fact that Demeter was the goddess of agriculture, and she was the reason why there was spring and summer and fall and winter, and I described that. That's also a nod to like I don't know if you caught it, but like climate change and like the severity of the extremes, right, that were happening with her emotions and her moods. And so there's a lot there. But I thought it was important to really to have a Demeter Revisited piece, because I offer redemption to most of the goddesses, but it was her. that for me, even when I read Greek mythology, I felt the most amount of like, you did nothing wrong, like, and you
Right.
suffered all of this and you did your best, the best that you could. And I write that in the piece.
Right.
She did the best that she could, given her mental state, the lack of support that she had. And that also, I think
Right.
about that with mothers in our own contemporary modern time. Like, there are some things that some mothers have done that are unforgivable. And then there's
Right.
other things that mothers have done that, like, they literally had no support. And some of our mothers would have been institutionalized or lobotomized if they were older. Like, there was not therapy
Yeah.
available. There was not necessarily like adequate medication available.
Yeah.
So there's like also like the same balance that I strike when I'm talking about patriarchy. I think I also strike that talking about the relationship of mother and daughter, where like all of these things can be true at the same time, which goes to your point. You're talking about all of the different emotions that you go through reading the book. All of these things can be true at the same time. And one of
Yes.
our favorite hallmarks of having of OCD, at least my favorite, is black and white thinking, where it's like it's either this or it's that, right? And in this healing journey and talking about the mother wound, it's like it's all of these things.
Yes.
It's pain.
Yes.
It's you hurt me, and this was abusive, and this hurt. Then this affected me, and this shaped me as a person. It's something I'm healing from, and this is the ways that you tried to love me. This is the best capacity you had to love me. You were also a young girl, and you were also
hurt.
a woman, and you were also hurt. And like, though I can have boundaries, I also can find the capacity to love you, especially because there are some of us that aren't no contact with our parents and our caregivers, right? There are cases where people do have to go non-contact. But what about those of us that like have to sit in this place of like, this is someone that hurt me. This is my parent. This is someone I love. How do I navigate this relationship? Because everyone is navigating this relationship, because it is the relationships that shape us for better or for worse. So I don't know if my mom will ever read this book. I don't think she will. But for me, revisiting Demeter was like, I guess, my gift to my mom and to myself, of like, this is the truth of you, and I also see how hard you tried. Yes. And now I'm gonna avenge you. And then we move towards vengeance, which I'm like, yes.
Yes, we move towards vengeance. Though, a quick note on something you just said. You said this was a gift to my mother and to myself, and that made me think of how you had pointed out the line earlier towards the end of that piece of Demeter Revisited, where Persephone says, my mother was in rare form. She did her best. All she did was her best. I can release myself now from the pain of not having her the way I wanted her. The least I can do is forgive her. And so talking about the healing process and rage, I think something that I can relate to in this piece and to what you're talking about is that, yes, we can be upset and angry, rightfully so, for the ways in which we've been hurt by our mothers. And to your point, there are absolutely those who, rightfully so, go no contact because, of the level of harm. Though, again, bringing it back to this piece into how I can relate to it, that's something that helped me to shift the direction of where my anger and the severity of my rage, where it truly was pointed at. And I think that's a helpful position when navigating trauma, because a big part of trauma narrative is, why me? Why did this happen to me? A lot of that pulls on concepts of, what we thought was safe, our spiritual beliefs and our connections. And being able to shift into a position emotionally to understand it's this and it's that, like you said, one of the very challenging things of having OCD, finding that gray, is so liberating in a way, because then you can recognize the degree of where that rightful anger ends and begins for that specific relationship, with your mother. And of course, that's individual for each person. But I think it does ultimately, to your point, help to then shift naturally in the story of the vengeance, because then Persephone can fully understand. It's not that she hasn't been angry about what had happened to her. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Headphones are telling me, wrap it up, Nicole. But it shifts beautifully into this portion of the story, into the end, because we see it's not that Persephone hasn't been mad, especially to your point. She really starts to feel rage with the introduction of Medusa, and then her birth helps her to really start embodying this and feeling this. But learning in trauma to go through the fluctuation of the emotions helps us to then delineate the appropriate levels. And I think what I'm getting at is, I think for me in my own healing journey and my own growth journey, it's helped me to understand, a lot of this rage, yes, are to individuals who have hurt me, but ultimately to this larger systematic oppression, which is really, I guess, my attempt at a segue into this last portion of where we see
the best part of the fucking book. So let's see. So then, where we move from all of that, one of the pieces, the two lines in revisiting Demeter is, "There's only one thing left to do. The rage coursing through my body with the realization of how we were set up to be destroyed moved my body with murderous intent." Then I write about La Fiera, which I want to just say one piece about, because of the last piece we'll talk about. I talk about what I became after I gave birth, which is La Fiera, and La Fiera translates to the wild thing. So that's what una fiera is, someone who is wild. And so I talk about being postpartum. I talk about developing depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsiveness. I talk about wanting to walk into the river with my children, and how that is a nod to what a lot of the scary thoughts that women have in the postpartum, that they're terrified of. But it's a woman's and the people's mental health after they give birth is extremely precarious, and we're not allowed to talk about it because we feel scared that we're going to get our children taken away from us, that we sound crazy, all of that. But this is real. And when I was able to get a therapist or a psychiatric nurse that I spoke to about when I had OCD, when I was diagnosed with OCD, about the thoughts I was having, I was able to then feel at ease, knowing that and being reassured that just because you're having those thoughts doesn't mean you're going to do that. But then to the larger piece where I say it couldn't be me to rob them of life, it would have to be me to protect them. And so that then ties in what I was talking about with the meter and everything all together. And so I was on the other side of motherhood, no longer a girl, but not quite who I was, much more fierce and far more deadly. And then we move into Murdering Hades. So I have to read this piece, and then we can this piece. So before I read this piece is like the orgasm of the book, if you will. It is. And when I was writing it, before I put it all together and I am where I am now, post book, when I wrote this book, it was the most cathartic experience I have had around specific trauma to write this piece. Because with rage, right, we're often either we're directing it outside of our body or we're hurting someone, but to be able to put it into words the way I'm about to read it really gave me a sense of ease. And I felt so relieved after I wrote this piece. And you'll see why. So the piece is Murdering Hades. Well, well, well. If it isn't the motherfucker who killed me. The air choked on itself. The bastard choked on his spit. The only sound I could hear was the squelching of my wet, muddy feet on his linoleum floor and the pounding of his heart. I never broke my glare as I strutted towards the monster of my nightmares, the horror of my heart, and the thorn in my side. This motherfucker had the audacity to wear white. Don't try to be an angel now, darling. I got close enough to see him better. He was an old man now, the dark circles under his eyes showing me the sleepless nights spent torturing others like me were no longer badges of honor. He stood from his table, perhaps to challenge me, perhaps to keep his wits about me. The closer I got to him, the closer he backed into the corner. Don't tell me that Hades is afraid of little old Persephone. I thought you were dead. I made sure of it. Ah, what a fucking rookie move. Don't you know that you should never look back? When you murder someone, make sure you aim for the most vital organ, my love. I loved you. No, baby, you loved the idea of me. You loved how I came undone in your hands after you groomed me to do so. You loved the way you melted in my mouth and how I gazed up at you unable to speak. It felt like power to have me on my knees. You loved how I made you feel like a god. You were bold enough to think I was speaking about you when I'd say, oh my god. I was close enough to touch him. Hades stiffened. He seemed horrified that I'd dirty him. Oh, what's this? Are you afraid that I'll ruin your sparkling white suit with my sullied hands? Would it be awful if someone saw you covered in your own shit? Did you have a date? Suddenly, finding his boldness, he cleared his throat. Not that that's any of your business, but yes, very nice. Shut the fuck up, viejo sucio. You are pestilence. You are worse than anything that has befallen the earth. I hate you deeply, and I wish I had never met you in my life. I screamed, shaking the walls of his hideout and spitting in his face. What's wrong with the motherfucking bane of my existence? I said scornfully, lifting a clawed, muddied finger up to his cheek. Visibly cringing now that I was so close to him, I slowly carved the side of his face with my sharp nails, pressing hard enough to make him think I would draw blood. You seem so weak now. I thought you were scary and intimidating when I was a little girl. I thought you were the big bad wolf, el matatán, el mismo fucking demonio. Ay sí, papi, qué maldito susto pasé contigo. I was confused momentarily at his lack of self-defense. Surely it couldn't be this easy to face my murderer. I looked him in the eyes and felt something in me soften. I wanted to be close to him, to erase the pain of death with pleasure again, to rebuild the fantasy world I grew up in and he had joined. In that softness, he reached out and grabbed me close to his body, forgetting his white suit. Why did you come see me, Persephone? You can't get enough of me. I can make you feel real good. I know you've missed me. I was too shocked to immediately respond as the heat of his body warmed the coldness of my skin. I almost forgot why I had come back as his fingers crept up my back, looking for a way to disarm, undress me. He is intoxicating. I closed my eyes as his other hand guided mine to his front so I could feel how hard he was getting. Hades let go of me and undid his belt. He zipped open his pants and pulled out his cock. My jaw tightened, and a wave of rage pulled me out of my shock. Hades leaned into me again. Close enough to my ear, I could feel his hot breath on my neck. And right then, he sealed our fate. Good girl. Now get on your knees and show me how much you love me. The smell of something putrid filled my nostrils as my claws dug in. I have never heard a man scream the way I did that night. I enjoyed every second of it. He came undone in my hand. His blood spilled over me before I pulled away from him. The sickening sound of flesh ripping was the last thing I heard from him. No, my love. Tú eres el demonio. Yo soy la fiera. Hades' body dropped to the floor as he bled out. His cock was a sad little flaccid appendage in my hand. I had castrated him so many times in my head. I thought I would use a knife to finally take his most prized possession in life in one shot. This was much more satisfying. I waited until he stopped moving, stuffed his cock into his mouth, and put 2 coins on his eyes. Hecate waited at the exit for me, smiling. It was time to take the throne. Love it.
Just the collective sigh of relief and catharsis. Wow. Just, something I so value about this piece, and I'm not going to lie, the first time I read this, I got really upset, was the way he's able for a moment to disarm Persephone's. Though I, of course, read it a few times because at first I was like, Carmen, why would you do this to me? But then reading through it, I understand the point of that. And as we're talking about trauma, and the more I'm learning about trauma, that is a very, very real possibility of being disarmed again by your abuser, by your perpetrator. Because, and I guess in my own way, I experienced that in a very different way, and it's not about my story, but yeah, that's a very real, like neurobiological connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like she says, to go back into the world I had created, the one he had joined, there's always that feeling, I think, once you're on the other side of, maybe not always, maybe that just might be where I'm at right now, but regardless of the amount of work you do after trauma, there is sometimes this longing for these parts of you before, like you had said earlier, you know very well in your mind these fragments of who you were before certain traumatic life events happened. And I think sometimes it's easy to go back to that and to long and to say, well, if I could just do this one thing, and perhaps that's also the OCD talking, because high compulsions to make things go away, to make the anxiety go away. But
also I also wrote that because that is actually, again, to like a nod to my actual real life story, what happened to me when this man came back into my life. I did soften, and I did, and I had to work through some shame around the fact that I had the experience I did have with him when he came back into my life, and how easy it is, because it's a part of us that will and can go back. But that in very much the same way that she experienced rage is the same journey I went through as well. That, I softened for a moment, and then rage.
But then you were snapped out of it, yes.
And the shock of it then was like, how dare you, right? And then led to me completely castrating him, figuratively in my case, out of my life. But then in this piece, being able to do it in the way that I imagined it, and was able to in some ways kill the power that this person had over me.
That's exactly it. And I think, to be honest, when I first read it, there was a part of myself that in my own story, my abuser still had a mental power over me, because this was a big part of a catalyst of me doing some very intensive somatic work. But again, I'm not trying to center myself, but I appreciate you speaking into that, because I think I wasn't being honest with myself, and I was allowing the rawness of my emotion of being like, why would she soften? And then understanding that there were numerous times while editing this piece, and I told you, like, I need to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
I need a time out.
Yep.
And a lot of it was triggering in the sense of intrusive memories, nightmares, thoughts, somatic sensations. So I appreciate you highlighting that. And to your point, yeah, there is some shame around that, but ultimately we get vindicated. Especially putting the cock in the mouth is just
chef's kiss.
It's a chef's kiss. It's so good.
And then, but
it's
then
so
the void on his eyes, which is also like sending you off.
Sending you off, and in a way, showing you what you could not show me.
Mm-hmm.
Showing you that I am the bigger person.
Not just that, like like a proper burial.
Right.
Because in Greek mythology, like, or at least in that time, before you go into the underworld, they would put 2 coins on the person's eyes as fare for the ferry that would take you across the river.
Yes.
Which is, some type of like level of like respect.
Exactly. I'm in respect in terms of, again, maybe this is just reflective and biased of where I'm in my personal life journey, but like I have more respect than you could ever give me for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And not like respect, like I'm absolving you, but like also respectfully putting you to peace and to rest in my mind.
That part. Yes, because similar to how she did for Demeter, I'm not going to allow this generational trauma to impact my relationship with myself in this current present and in the future, my relationship with my children, and of course then we go on to, see how, we take over, mm-hmm. and it's wonderful, mm-hmm. and it's fantastic, and I love it. I do, though, want to honor and give you the stage. I had just one final question, but I want to make sure this is really the penultimate piece is murdering Hades. And so I want to make sure you as the author have the chance to speak into everything about that piece that you want to.
I think that's really it that I can say about that piece, because it's my favorite. It's probably my favorite piece of the entire that I wrote, and that's like, and I love the book. I think I did an amazing job with the book, but I also think I did a really great job at building towards this. Like, it wasn't premature, yes. Like I could have done this sooner. For who? For what? Because that wasn't my journey in real life. Like, it took all the poetry that I wrote, all the things that I felt, for me to finally be able to like be done. And it's interesting to have this conversation a year after the book's been published, because I like, there was the woman that wrote the book, the one that published the book, and now who I am after this book. I'm a totally different person. Yeah. So no, I can't really say much more about that. I'm more moving towards like closing out this book and closing out this conversation.
Beautiful. Well, I guess the last thing I think I'm curious to hear more insight from you on is your thoughts around, given what your book depicts about our social structure and the lived experiences, it is truly centered around the female lived experiences, though acknowledging and holding space for male experiences as well. What are some of your thoughts on how we can create spaces for more of these stories? You had mentioned earlier, we deserve more stories like these where there is true resolve, where it's not just, I certainly don't mean to undermine, boil down sexual assault or rape, but not just a rape story, but is the understanding of the fullness of the person and their lived experiences before and after and the resolve. What are your thoughts on how we might be able to create more space for these stories?
I think supporting more organizations that focus on helping survivors, having more conversation like these, and like this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you and share it with an audience so that there's more of this type of conversation out in the world. I haven't promoted this book a lot, and maybe a big reason for that is because it's such a personal story for me, and I wrote this book for me, and I wrote this book for survivors, but hopefully like having maybe more circles where people are talking about this. I know that I did a lot of work in healing circles and people talking about their experiences, so having more healing circle spaces. But I also think that like as a culture, we're starting to do this more. You know, like coming to this place and coming to this realization. So possibly maybe I need to talk about it more. I think this is my attempt at doing that. And I think encouraging more of our people that we know in our life to embrace the somatic experience of it, not pushing people to go through through experiences and memories they don't want to go through, but also like being like, you know, there's so much more for us to experience in life. But unfortunately, we live in a society that's patriarchal, so the attention and the money and the funding that goes towards this type of work is not abundant. So I guess any of us can do is just do what we can in the spheres that we can. So as a midwife, you know, I talk about as much as possible my experience of how my birth helped to heal me, and being more able to sit in discomfort when I see somebody being triggered, and being able to hold space for that, and being able to like validate that, like something that I began doing a lot after I was finally able to like really recognize my trauma was when somebody told me, like, the first thing I say is, I believe you. Yeah. And you did nothing wrong. And it was not your fault.
Yeah.
You know, so like that might sound like a cliche, but that means a lot for someone who's just disclosing for the first time. And I've had people disclose to me for the first time, you know, making sure that we continue to strengthen our bonds with people that have survived this, because there's so much. And like you said, it's still happening. So it's not like they're like, even as we speak, like I don't even want to talk about the statistic of how often it happens, you know, even in this conversation we've had. But the more that we understand, I think the more that we talk about it, the more it stops being taboo. And I've even seen that millennials have really been leading the conversation around protecting children from it, about highlighting that this happens to children, that this is a threat to children, highlighting, and I've seen a lot of conversation online on like the predatory nature of some men, people is sharing their experiences for other people to learn. So I don't think it's like, I don't think it's on me, but I think it's just on more of us,
of course,
to continue to like write a book like I did. Maybe like, you know, as I get older, like, and I've maybe seeing what happens with this conversation and how people respond to it, where that takes me, because this will take on a life of its own. Encouraging you, for example, to like do this work when you finally become a licensed therapist, and what you'll do with it. So I think all of us in our own way, right? Like there's so many layers to how do we address this, because there's like the actual talking about it, the reclaiming of pleasure, the communal piece to it, the collective trauma, the individual trauma, the family trauma, so much of it, right? So I think the best answer I can give is we have to keep talking about it, and we have to not just talk about it, then share some of the tools. And I guess some of the tools that helped me heal from this was therapy, going specifically to a psychiatric nurse who had experience in perinatal mood disorders. Support groups. I went to a support group with other mothers. Somatic healing. So for me, somatic healing looked like dancing, yoga throughout my life. When I was having flashbacks, and for those of you who don't know what flashbacks are like a full mental and physical experience. And so instead of resisting the flashback in my body, I let my body go into it. And that helped, like, it moved through my body. And I'm not saying that this is for everybody. I also have training in like energy work and all of that to have been able to let myself go into it knowing I had support. So somatic healing, like breathing, being more aware of my body, like giving my body language, learning where things feel, giving that language. I said therapy, herbs. You know, I love herbs to the moon and back. I don't take any allopathic medication, but I do take herbs that help me cope with feelings. So like I take St. John's wort, I take lemon balm and skullcap, all of those specific to the nervous system. Journaling, friendships, strong friendships where I can talk about these things and as they come up. Spirituality, you know, meditation, connecting with universe, spirit. I think those are the biggest ways that I've healed from this. You know, letting myself cry, my children, and letting my children be children, and also like repairing ruptures that happen with my children, because I'm not a perfect mother and I am breaking cycles of intergenerational trauma. So like at least lessening the trauma that is passed on through myself, but seeing my children thrive and letting my children be mad at me even, and letting my children have emotions towards me, as messy as it can get, like that is healing for my inner child to see a child go through that. And then taking care of myself and share and like being clear and like upfront about like, I'm feel burnt out, or I feel this, or I'm feeling that, and I'm not making myself be like the mother that has to do it all and know it all. So yeah, I think that's what I can say about healing.
Incredible. I think you covered so much ground with that, so thank you for that very thorough response. And I think that's a good place to wrap up. Ultimately, you know, big takeaway that I took from it is that individual health is partly communal health, and that means communal contribution in the sphere that you feel called to and you have expertise and a multitude of ways of caring for yourself in a holistic manner. So this was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed rediscovering and retalking about this book and rediscovering my rage. And truly, it's a fantastic book. And for those of you who are listening, if you haven't read this, please do yourself a favor, because I've read a lot of literature in my life, and I'm not saying that to be like, oh, look at me. I'm saying that because I'm about to say that this is truly one of the best written pieces of literature I've ever read. And it just so happened to be written by my best friend, which is just like so cool because like, yeah. So thank you so much. This was awesome. I enjoyed. I mean, this is also just like a glimpse of our conversations, like low-key, but
this is literally what we talk about, like just on the fly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being the person to do this with. Like, I really was trying to think of who would be perfect to have this conversation with, and it was great to have it with you specifically. And I feel like it kind of like brings like a nice full circle like moment for us, because you were such an important part of this book coming to life. And so I thank you for editing my book. Thank you for being there for me when I was writing the book. Thank you for doing this interview with me. I love you so much, Nicole.
I love you so much. I wish you were here in person so I could squeeze you.
All right, my love.
I freaking love you.
All right.